Thank you for joining us today for our special presentation on CMMC and secure software development. If you haven't already, please put your name in your school in the chat box so we can record your attendance. There should be time at the end for Q&A. So if any questions or comments come up during the webinar, please put those in the chat box. If we do run out of time, we will get those answered for you offline. Also, there will be a short survey for everyone at the end of this half hour to fill out. So be looking for that. Okay, so we have two presenters today for us. They are both from partner colleges of our CTC grant. Kyle Jones is Chair and Associate Professor at Sinclair Community College's Computer Information System Program. He worked in IT for over 15 years prior to moving to education. Dr. Rajiv Balkan is a professor at the Computer and Information Technology Department at Lone Star College. He has over 30 years of leadership contributions in higher education across a variety of settings, including Dean and Division Chair. So this time we'll turn over to Kyle and Rajiv, and we thank them both for their time and their expertise today.
But I'll start first with the software secure development, and Kyle will jump in when we move on to the CMCC section. But the first question we have is, how many do you integrate the secure coding techniques into your teaching software? Okay, since we got a short presentation, we'll not do the polls or anything, but we're going to answer at the end of this presentation, we'll answer this question and why secure coding is so critical in including in your curriculum. This is this morning's the cyber threat. If you see at the FireEye cyber threat, see how many, the attacks have been going on around the world. And this was the last night, close to 800,000 attacks last night. Okay. So what's happening? We look at all the headline news of Microsoft and other things, but a lot of small businesses are getting attacked every day. So the Molson Coors beer was out for a long time. In March, we already know about the Microsoft hack. There was a software hack of the the Exchange server, and there were 4 flaws in the Microsoft Exchange servers that were found, and almost 250,000 accounts were compromised. Okay, a lot of people may not know, Central Pinpoint was out in February, March out there for almost a week out there. Our water supply has been hacked in Florida. So a lot of things are happening out there. SolarWinds, we all know about SolarWinds because more than about 120,000 customers of SolarWinds were under attack. Okay. All right, so let's say after the SolarWinds attack, the CEO of the Red Hat said that any software would get broken into. The cloud providers also may get broken into as well. But this is what is an eye-opener for all of us and why secure coding is so critical. Application attack layers, the application layers are getting attacked more now than the infrastructure's attack because it's easy to get in. And according to the IDG research, nearly 2/3 of the applications out there are never assessed for security. And so that's why we have a long, all the software-driven systems, which we have now, is opening up a door for all the hackers out there. So what's happening in the software world? We have everything is software enabled. So what happened is a lot of data breaches occurring, the software which is open. There's a legacy software out there, a lot of flows, which we already know what's happening, but we never put a patch to all of those software applications out there. So what happened is when Biden administration took over in January 5th, there was an executive order about the software development controlled by the Chinese company. But this was President Trump before he left offices. He signed an executive order to see how the Chinese companies and the softwares are having an impact on the national security. And this was an order signed, which is creating all these secure coding requirements now a necessity. The executive order for improving the nation's cybersecurity, which was signed in May 12th, is a very, very critical infrastructure project for the NIST and other Department of Homeland Security as per the executive order. So the July was the deadline for the NIST to come up with some guidelines for the vendors and the developers on the verification of the system security code. There's a link to it, and you can see what's already out there. And this is just one example of what they're suggesting that makes sure that if the code is done, it at least it's analyzed statically and then dynamically if you have a live data on the web and other things out there. And then we also have to consider now the Privacy Act. The California Privacy Act was passed and now it's retroactive until January 23rd, but the data from January 2022 will be included now. Okay? Now this gives you legislation, comprehensive privacy law comparison. So what's happening around the country. As a developer, wanted to start looking at all of these laws too, because each state law may say that certain data must reside within the U.S. borders or within the boundaries of the state and things like that. So we have to start considering all those different laws since we don't have a national federal policy yet. Okay, the Congress is already after, you already heard about the Facebook and all the Apple CEOs and everything were already out there in the Senate hearings a couple of months ago. So we may see some federal legislation coming up on that. So what's happening is, so we have a development world, we have an operation world, and we have a security world. So we all combining together the integration so that we have what we call a very, very secure application development process, what we call a DevSecOps now. Okay, the DevSecOps, the Air Force is totally revamping everything out there from the old legacy software to the whole new DevSecOps process. And they're going to transform the culture completely out there. If you look out there, and if you look at all the stuff, if you see the more things in detail, it's all about the secure software development processes are followed or not at this point. All right, then I can turn it over now to Kyle. He will talk a lot more about the CMMC.
Great, thanks, Rajiv. And we're going to talk about this a little bit about the CMMC, but then we're going to connect everything back together when I hand it back off about the importance of secure software, why we'd want to teach it, where it belongs and all that kind of stuff. So let's take a look first about what this is. So I have a couple links of things that I would like to share with everybody today. So I'm actually going to click through some of my browser tabs that I have up here, and I'm going to drop these down into chat just as I go through. First of them is the actual military page with the explanation of what the CMMC is. Again, the CMMC stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. As you can just imagine, every person that does defense contracts that works with the government has to meet a standard, either 1 through 5, and has to meet this standard by 2025. Now, that's everybody from small businesses, mom and pop shops that do any type of federal work. They have to meet a standard, a certain level of the CMMC process. Now, as you can see through this, it says the CMMC will combine a various cybersecurity standards. So we already touched on some of the NIST standards that are out there. They're just referred in this document as best practices, and we'll get into this here in a little bit more. But the idea is that every company, so there's anywhere from 300 to 400,000 companies that would need to meet this standard. Now, the reason that I'm saying 300 to 400,000 is some of those are companies and some of those are consultants, right? So if you were to add the consultants that have to meet the standards and the companies, I mean, it's probably in the 400,000 range. But companies, it's definitely in the 300,000 range. And I'm in Dayton, Ohio. So every company around me is focused on this CMMC because they normally have 2 sections of a company. The section that works for the Air Force Base, because the Air Force Base is one of the largest in the US here at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And then they have a private and a public sector. So that means they have to meet these CMMC standards. Now, the nice thing is there is a workshop out there if you're interested in the CMMC. I had the opportunity to teach it over the summer and a couple of the other classes, but the videos were pre-recorded. So if you would like to get more in depth into the CMMC and kind of watch some videos about what it entails or what it covers, that's a very interesting piece. But if you're deciding to teach secure coding, you might want to start working on the different levels or why you would want to incorporate the CMMC into your class. Well, there's a company that we're working with that's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Dashboard that'll actually help you do a review of a company to see if it meets the guidelines, which is a really cool company. There's a lot of great information that you can uncover. Just last Friday, I invited a company to come in to speak to my students, and I couldn't get the company to talk about anything other than them trying to meet the CMMC standard. They knew it's coming down to them. This company makes metallized fabrics. They make the tents and all of the systems you see that the president would go into that blocks all of the wireless shielding. They have to make sure that they are at the highest level of the CMMC standard. So they have to make sure all their programs and all their software development and everything that the company does meets these standards. Now, I did mention that class that's available out there, that CMMC certification workshop class. As a part of that class, that was developed with National Science Foundation funds. So that is a class that should be coming back around to take again. It should be a free class to take. And with that, we already built out a shell, a classroom shell for the CMMC. Now, you may not teach an entire class on it, but kind of what we're getting at today is you can incorporate CMMC and the importance of it along with a practical example like secure coding, like what we're talking about today, where you can combine the importance of meeting a standard with the actual job role or development that maybe one of our students would do. And again, just because of my location where I'm currently at in Dayton, Ohio, I'm not sure if somebody wants access to that class. Let me know. Again, that might be available for that class should be coming up again. That'll be free to take for, schools, anybody that would like to take it. It's a great program. It's normally about 3 days, and it covers the entire CMMC process and gives you access to the class resources and tools. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rajiv, and he'll talk about the importance of where the secure coding aspect of the CMC actually comes into play.
All right. So now we know CMMC, like he said, by the fiscal year 2025, every Department of Defense contractors, businesses must meet the requirements. And that's just only three years down the road now. But what happens is when you look at the detail, if you take the class or if you want to read those documents and see, this is the section 875 is more pertaining to today's presentation, because we talk about the secure software requirement for the whole processes out there. And what they say that you must the 835 section inside the 735, 875 section mandates the establishments of secure coding practices for the whole supply chain process and even your third-party sources. So if you're using any third-party software, you got to make sure that any open source software or anything, they're all in compliance with the secure system out there. So what happened is now the government is asking us, Department of Defense is asking us, and if you look at all the job market now, you're already seeing all this stuff coming up. Secure development, secure coding practices, they're all up there. Even for the Home Depot ad I saw in Indeed last week for the entry-level person, they say you have 60% of the job will be to develop the secure code out there for the entry-level person. So this is what you should do, right? We've been teaching students, hey, write a code, block this road, which they did. But they forgot that, hey, I did not put some loopholes out there, right? So the software is exploited and people look what happened. Over time, they did not go through this gate. They just went around it because the loophole was open. So that's what happens. We just teach this part, but we forget to teach this part. So we just start teaching what we call the whole secure. Students have to start thinking about a security in their mindset when they're designing the whole thing. Now this makes a little bit of sense out of it, right? So we got a gate, we made it one way. This is the other side of the thing, and a nicer, not a winter days out there. And then we put some roadblocks out there so people cannot go out and things like that. So we have patched the loophole for the intruders to come inside at this point. So this is what we're talking. Take the coding aspect, but go one step further and teach them how to create all these loopholes out there. So this is what we normally teach, the waterfall methods out there, okay? And what's happened now, everything is now moving to the agile software development processes where the software is getting developed or the updates are getting done within 1 to 4 week cycle. Okay, that's a maximum of the agile software development. Maximum you can do is about 6 weeks. So we use, most of the businesses uses a Scrum processes out there. But this is the Scrum guidelines out there. So what they're doing now within their development team, now they're embedding the security person in the development process. So that way you are understanding exactly while you're designing all the products out there. I'm looking at my time here. All right, so what's happening? The software development is also getting more complex. We are not looking at, look at the number of lines of codes just the military drone has, or the Boeing 747 has it, or, you know, there are millions and millions of lines of code and very, very complex entity out there. Okay, Tesla is what, like with the whole autonomous system of Tesla is almost like 100 million lines of code out there. So it's getting more complex out there. And so that's why we have no idea what's open, what's not. And that's why people can go into the system right now, because since the software design was not done with this security in mind. So this is the DevSecOps survey done, you know, but what it said, the 40% organizers said we can't find people with the application security testing knowledge. And the 70% of the developers said they didn't get any adequate security training while there. But this is a staggering news. A minuscule 3% said they learned the most relevant profession of relevance through the college education, only 3%. And what 76% of college educated respondents said they did not take a single security class during their higher education. And that's staggering out there. Because what we do, this is what we do. You know, we have a separate cybersecurity curriculum, we have a separate programming curriculum, and then we have a separate networking curriculum. We never talk about integrating all this stuff. So while the business world is merging the security and the software development, well, in the academic world, we are creating 3 separate different fields out there. So we are moving further and further away rather than moving all this together. So what we need to start teaching is basically moving from the DevOps to the DevSecOps at the code level. Because we need to build the security at the code level, not afterwards. Okay, a lot of men might be surprised at what happened in the CompTIA. The cybersecurity analyst, this is not about cybersecurity on a network. Look at this, 1 out of 5 questions are on software security, okay? So if person taking a class, and if this person doesn't know anything about secure coding or software exploitation or things like that, that person is going to fail the test. Now, if you go deeper into this testing and see what they ask for obviously the software development lifecycle integration with the security processes out there. They ask questions on what are the user exception testing, stress test, security regression, and the code review. So these are all the stuff they're asking. And then they have scenarios which will ask you all of these questions based on the secure coding processes. So input validation is the very easiest. Most of the people do that in our curriculum, but the rest of the stuff, I've never seen anybody teach or at least include or request the students to do it. If you look at the ACM curriculum, which just came out on the cybersecurity guidance out there. Okay, so now there's a whole component on software security in this new curriculum guidelines. And this is for 2-year degree. You know, if you look at it, it's for associate degree. It is not for a bachelor's degree or master's degree. This is for us. It's the development of software with security and protection vulnerabilities that can be easily exploited. It cannot be easily exploited. We need to teach them. We need to show them how things are working on it. And then they're giving some examples about what the essential competencies are. They have to write the secure code for sure with appropriate documentation. They need to analyze the whole code and see had they left anything out where a person from outside can attack. And obviously, they're using a third party or software. They need to create some libraries and documentations of how secure the certain situations are. And there are a lot of supplemental competencies out there, all related to software secure programs. So why software secure programs? Because what happens when a hack occurs, okay, businesses lose on an average a lot of money. I mean, what to say, $1 in design phase grows to $60 to $100 when it's shipped out, because they're going to go back, rewrite the code, do the patchwork, and have a lot businesses are losing lots of money out there. All right, the Gartner Group says, hey, we don't have to train everybody in everything. They're not going to be security experts, but you got to make sure that all developers understand the basic secure coding concepts out there, because that's going to be critical out there. Okay. And then obviously the Gartner Group talks about the privacy laws and how GDPR and all the things which we need to start and consider all this stuff. All right, this is what we call the top 10 issues on 2021. They're comparing for 2017. Look at what they've added. Insecure design is now the number 4th reason why we are getting hacked. And if you look at the software and data integration, it's another layer which they've added, which is causing what they call the cyber attacks out there. So you find all these links out there. They also came up with a new application security verification standard. The 4.0 is out just about a couple of months ago. So if people want to really start understanding how to build all this stuff into the curriculum and things like that, you can talk to me, you can talk to Kyle later on, and we can show you how to start integrating all this into your curriculum out there. Okay, so obviously some of the problems with every software application is the user supply data is not validated. It's not filtered correctly. We do not measure. I'm looking for an integer data, but we don't measure the integer data. We just say, hey, put anything the user wants. Please enter a number. That's all you say. But I can enter a character. I can enter everything because we're not validating all those data, which the user is asking or the application is asking. So there are a lot of ways where people are getting it because the software application is not secure at this point. And then these are the essential learning outcomes from the ACM guide. It said, write a secure code which implements input validation and prevent stock overflow, the integer range violations. What happens if you enter a number which is 1 million? Okay, and then we have 8 bytes. Okay, 1 byte, 2 bytes, 3 bytes. You got to start looking at all of those different violations which are occurring in your applications at that point. All right, there are a lot of standards out there you want to get started. Okay, at the Open Web Application Security Project, we got the whole secure coding practices guidelines. It's a brand new, it just updated. There's a developer's guide 2.0, it just came out. So they were updated from about 5-7 years ago because of all the requirements now. And then the code review guide, which was just updated. So the first, I just noticed that last week they have updated. So I just put both the PDF links out there. There are standards out there for secure coding. This is a good website, the Carnegie Mellon. Okay, they got a lot of information how to get started in secure coding. If you're teaching Java, there's a specific way. There's a certain security because Java does certain things where C++ doesn't do certain things. Especially in C++, you will see pointers. With Java, I don't believe in pointers and things like that. How do you handle all these different class in these objects and things like that? So you can look at all those there. And the Carnegie Mellon said the top 10 secure coding, you should obviously validate the input first. And a lot of people don't look at the compiler. The IDEs are getting very, very sophisticated now. So if you literally pay attention to all the warnings in your development process, in your integrated development environment, you can find out a lot of things. Sanitized data sent to other systems, that's very, very critical up there. Okay? So these are the top 10 secure coding concepts we teach. Microsoft has a nice security development lifecycle training at their website. And what they say, all organizations at risk if the application layer is not secure. Okay, so that's what Microsoft is preaching at this point to everybody. If you look at any of the textbooks, none of the textbooks are teaching. I'm teaching right now. There's no concept of SDL, there's no concept of Agile in the textbook, and there's no concept of secure coding. And this is advanced data structure classes and third level classes, and the publishers are not adding to. All right, so the best practices right there, the coding project, data input validation, we talked about it. This all we can do it, okay? Division by zero, right? Explain to them why division by zero should be handled. Any mathematical computations you're doing in the calculations, this is the first thing we should track, because that's where the denial of service attack can happen. All right, what I do have a lot of integrity statements in my classrooms. I have a version control. Every time people write it, I make all the students save all the different version controls to show them exactly how to do all this stuff. So there's a code review analysis from Microsoft right there if you're teaching C++ out there for a Visual Studio up there. Okay, this is the National Science Foundation grant was done. So if you go to this website, they have some input validation activities for your students. So they can go and a little bit learn about these secure software out there. There is the secure scripting module is developed by the NICET Center. It's a very good module. Okay, so all right, the IT skill standards has already developed the software development cluster. So there are a lot of learning outcomes out there. And that's what should take care of the 25 minutes, right?
Very good. It's great. We have like 2 minutes. Anybody any questions that we can address right now?
I addressed a couple in private chat. Sorry, Mark.
Okay, that's great. Good.
But I know that there is a lot of jobs around. I was just talking to a couple of people in private chat that there's a lot of jobs around every aspect of this. So, when we talk about secure coding, like if we're teaching this in our classes and they work for a government entity that has to pass the CMMC, they'll be the person interviewed by the auditor for CMMC. So we want to make sure that our students are learning this because they're going to be the ones at the companies that are going to be audited for any type of the NIST standard or for the CMMC, but more importantly, the CMMC because it's going to be required. NIST publications are kind of just general best practices where you're going to have to make sure that you meet this.
So in the chat box there, we have our survey. It's like 5 questions. If you would just take a quick moment and just fill it out for us, we kind of know how we did today and looking ahead to the future. Thank you everyone for your time this afternoon. Thank you, Rajiv and Kyle, for joining us in that thorough presentation. We will package this up nice and neat as a video on YouTube. We'll send you the link in case you want to share it or watch it again. I'll also share the slides as a separate file.